I'm Morgan, 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my father hurled my mother's wedding gift to me onto the cold marble floor in front of 150 guests. That sound, the small, muted thud of worn leather striking stone, will stay with me forever. So will the words he bellowed. Garbage belongs with garbage. He meant my mother, her gift, and me. What he didn't realize, what none of us realized, was that the old, faded passbook he had just scorned held a secret that would shatter everything I believed about my family. A week later, when I brought it to the bank, the teller stared at me as if I'd emerged from a sealed vault, her face drained of color. Then she whispered, "Ma'am, please stay. Don't go anywhere." Before I reveal what happened next, if this story is touching you, please take a second to like and subscribe. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world, leave a comment with your location and the time there. I truly love to hear from you. Now, let me take you back 2 months before the wedding, when everything began to come apart. My family was never poor. That's the first thing you need to know. My father, Richard Donovan, owned a respectable, mid-sized real estate firm in Connecticut. Not a corporate giant, but solidly comfortable. He drove a Mercedes E-Class, collected Rolex watches, and never let anyone at the country club forget how self-made he was. Growing up in our 5-bedroom colonial in Greenwich, I quickly learned that success, in my father's eyes, had a very particular form, and it didn't resemble me. If you'd been born a boy, he told me once at 12, I'd have someone to hand the business to. I stood right in front of him, his only child. Clearly, that wasn't sufficient. My mother, Helen, lived on the edges of our home. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled through dinner parties and laughed at my father's jokes. Every morning she left for her part-time job at the local library, a position he ridiculed without fail. "What do you even do there?" he'd sneer. "Sort books no one reads? Count dust?" She never pushed back. Not once. She'd simply nod, clear the plates, and slip into the kitchen. For years, I thought she was weak. I'm ashamed to say it now, but I did. I mistook her silence for defeat. I had no idea what she was truly doing. I understood nothing. My father had a favorite saying, "In this house, men decide, women execute." He delivered it like profound wisdom, some timeless legacy, rather than cruelty dressed as tradition. And for most of my life, I accepted it. I believed my mother possessed nothing, that she was nothing without him. I was profoundly mistaken. I met Daniel Mercer on a Tuesday in October during a school field trip. I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary, the very career my father views as squandered potential. While chaperoning 23 8-year-olds on a construction site tour, I accidentally collided with the architect describing load-bearing walls. Daniel caught my elbow just before I tumbled into a stack of lumber. His hands were warm, his smile even warmer. "Careful," he said. "This is a hard hat zone." I wasn't wearing one. Neither, it turned out, was my heart. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. 2 years of dinners where he genuinely asked about my day. 2 years of being seen, not for what I could offer, but for who I was. Daniel's family differed from mine in every meaningful way. His father, Harold Mercer, led Mercer Development, a commercial real estate powerhouse that dwarfed my father's company. Yet you'd never guess their wealth from how they treated others. The first time I met Harold and Catherine in their Manhattan penthouse, they asked about my students, not our family's finances, not my prospects, but my students. 3rd grade is such a defining year, Catherine said while pouring me tea. That's when children truly begin to discover themselves. I nearly cried. No one had ever spoken of my work as though it carried real weight. When my father learned who Daniel's family was, his attitude shifted overnight. Suddenly, he cared about my relationship. Suddenly, he wanted to meet my fiancé. Suddenly, his daughter, the teacher, was forging valuable connections. The day after I announced my engagement, he called me for the first time in 6 months, not to congratulate me, but to inquire about Harold Mercer's portfolio. "I'll cover everything," my father declared 3 days after meeting Daniel's parents. I sat in his home office, the one with the mahogany desk and framed photos of his developments, somewhere he'd never invited me before. The leather chair groaned as he leaned forward, his eyes alive with something new directed at me. Genuine interest. The entire wedding, venue, catering, flowers, all of it. Consider it my gift. I should have been wary. He'd never spent more than $50 on my birthday. Now he wanted to spend $80,000 on a wedding? But Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and murmured, "Maybe he's trying to change." I wanted to believe it desperately. God, I wanted it so much. So I agreed. Within days, he'd reserved Westbrook Country Club, a place he didn't even belong to, but desperately wanted to. He chose the caterer, the florist, the band. He created invitations with gold foil lettering that exceeded my monthly salary. The guest list reached 150 names. I recognized perhaps 30. "Business associates," he explained when I asked. "Important people." Important to whom? The night before the invitations were mailed, my mother found me in the garden. She appeared quietly, as always, like a shadow at my side. "Morgan," she said gently, pressing something in my palm, "I have a gift for you too, but I'll give it on your wedding day." I glanced down. Her fingers, warm and slightly trembling, curled around mine. "It's the most important thing I own," she whispered. "Remember that, no matter what anyone says." I didn't understand then, but I would. On the morning of the wedding, as I sat in my childhood bedroom, my thoughts turned to my mother. There's a memory I'd nearly forgotten. I was 15, homesick from boarding school, drifting through the house in my pajamas. I'd gone to the kitchen hunting for crackers when I heard something from my parents' bedroom. Counting. My mother's voice, gentle and measured, like a lullaby woven from numbers. I tiptoed to the doorway and peeked inside. She sat on the edge of the bed, a slim notebook in her lap, a modest stack of bills spread across the comforter beside her. Not a fortune, perhaps a few $100s, but she handled each note as though it were priceless. When she noticed me, her expression shifted. Not quite guilt, something deeper, something I couldn't yet name. "Just grown-up things," she said, slipping the notebook into the old oak jewelry box that had once belonged to her mother. "Nothing to worry about." I never mentioned it again. Children don't, do they? We assume our parents' secrets have nothing to do with us. Yet sitting in that same bedroom 15 years later, morning light spilling through the curtains, I found myself wondering, what had she been saving for? And why did she have to hide it? My mother knocked at 9, holding the garment bag that contains my borrowed Vera Wang. "Are you ready?" she asked. I wasn't, not for any of it, but I smiled, rose, and let her help me into the dress my father had insisted upon. White silk and delicate imported lace, exquisite and exorbitant and utterly unlike anything I would have chosen. "You look beautiful," she said, her eyes glistening. I didn't realize then that she was quietly saying farewell to the life she had endured for my sake. Westbrook Country Club resembled a page torn from a luxury magazine. White roses spilled from crystal vases. A string quartet played Vivaldi beside the fountain. 300 chairs stood in flawless rows across the manicured lawn, each adorned with silk ribbons matching my bouquet. And at the heart of it all stood my father. From the bridal suite window, I watched him orchestrate the vendors like a general directing an army. "Move that table. Adjust those flowers. No, the champagne tower belongs there." He wore a Tom Ford suit I had never seen before. Charcoal gray, impeccably tailored. Fresh cufflinks caught the light at his wrists. He looked costly. He looked powerful. He looked like a man performing a carefully rehearsed part. "Your father has really outdone himself," my maid of honor, Sarah, murmured, looking over my shoulder. "I've never seen him so engaged." That was one way to put it. When the Mercer's car arrived, an understated black sedan, far from the ostentatious entrance my father would have preferred, I watched him change in an instant. Shoulders squared, smile broadened. He strode across the lawn, hand already outstretched, before Harold had even shut the door. "Harold, Catherine, welcome, welcome." It was a voice I didn't recognize. Warmer, smoother, the tone of a man who wanted something very badly. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother standing alone near the rose garden. She wore the champagne-colored dress my father had chosen for her, not the deep blue she had preferred, and her smile appeared carefully applied. Our eyes met through the window. For a fleeting second, something unspoken passed between us, something sorrowful and deeply understood. Then my father's voice carried across the lawn. "Let me give you the grand tour," and my mother's face went blank once more. The ceremony was beautiful, strange to say, perhaps, after everything that followed, but standing at the altar with Daniel's hands in mine, watching tears gather in his eyes as I spoke my vows, that moment was genuine. That moment belonged to us. "I love you," he whispered, while sliding the platinum band onto my finger. "No matter what happens, remember that." I didn't yet understand why he phrased it that way, like both a vow and a quiet warning. The minister declared us married. Daniel kissed me gently, and 150 people applauded, most of them strangers my father had invited. During that kiss, I glanced at the crowd. My father beamed not at me, but at Harold Mercer. He was already scheming, already networking, already turning my wedding into a business opportunity. In the front row, my mother sat alone. Her eyes were rimmed red. Her hands were knotted so tightly in her lap that her knuckles stood white. She wasn't smiling. "Mom's been crying all day," I whispered to Daniel as we walked back down the aisle. He squeezed my hand. "Wedding emotions, it's normal." But something in my chest insisted it wasn't normal at all. Something told me my mother's tears weren't born of joy. During cocktail hour, I watched her linger at the fringes of conversations, always solitary, always observing my father as he worked the room. Once she reached to touch his arm, he brushed her away without so much as a glance. "Not now, Helen." 3 words delivered as though she were an irritating insect near his glass. She withdrew her hand slowly, deliberately, the way someone learns to shrink themselves small. I should have gone to her then. I didn't. That remains one of my deepest regrets. The reception began at 7. By 8, my father was drunk. Not sloppily so. Richard Donovan would never allow such obvious disgrace, but the kind of drunk where his voice swelled, his anecdotes grew taller, and truth became elastic. I watched him trap Harold Mercer near the champagne tower, gesturing grandly with a champagne flute. $15 million in revenue last year, he overheard boast. "We're moving into commercial. Big things ahead." I knew his company had cleared perhaps $3 million at best. Harold's expression stayed courteously neutral, but I caught the quick glance he shared with Catherine, the silent, married people look that says, "We're both thinking the same thing and won't voice it aloud." "Your father has really outdone himself," Catherine remarked when she appeared beside me at the dessert table. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to distance myself from the spectacle unfolding across the room. "He's excited about the wedding," I offered weakly. Catherine rested a gentle hand on my arm. "I'm sure he is, dear," but her eyes conveyed something else entirely. Later I would learn that Harold had already done his homework, that he knew precisely how modest my father's company really was, that the entire performance had been transparent from the beginning. But in that moment, I only felt the slow mounting dread, the sensation of pressure building behind a dam. My father's laugh rang out again, too loud, too bright, too desperate. He clapped Harold on the shoulder as though they were lifelong confidants. The performance was so intense, I could almost see the strain beating on his brow. And my mother remained in the corner, watching silently, waiting. For what? I still didn't know. Not yet. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the family gifts." The MC's voice sliced through the champagne hum, and guests began drifting back to their seats. This was my father's moment. He had rehearsed his presentation for weeks. He claimed the stage first, of course. "Daniel Morgan," he began, his tone coated in that practiced warmth I had learned to recognize as false. "From the Donovan family to yours, a check for $50,000 toward your future." He raised an envelope of Italian leather embossed with gold. Polite applause rippled through the room. I smiled. The smile I had inherited from my mother, pleasant, vacant, obligatory. $50,000. We both knew he had borrowed against his credit line to produce it. $50,000. Really an investment in Harold Mercer's favor. "Thank you, Dad," I said, claiming the line that should have been mine. Harold Mercer went next. No theatrics, no flourish. He simply placed a small Tiffany blue box in Daniel's hand. "A key," he said plainly, "to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. It belonged to Catherine's grandmother. We thought you two might like to begin your life there." The room fell still. A brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was worth more than I could readily calculate. I caught my father's face for only a heartbeat. In that instant, his mask cracked. I watched the comparison land, watched him register that his $50,000 gesture had been utterly overshadowed. His jaw clenched, his smile twisted into something brittle. "How generous," he managed, the words edged just a fraction too sharp. Then the MC called the next name. "And now, from the mother of the bride, Helen Donovan." My mother stood. In her hands she carried something small, something worn, something old. My stomach lurched without explanation. Not yet. She didn't approach the microphone. She walked straight to where Daniel and I sat at the head table, her steps deliberate and unhurried. In her palms rested a small book, perhaps 5 inches by 3, bound in faded blue leather, softened at the corners by years of handling. "Morgan," she said, her voice scarcely louder than a breath. The room strained to listen. "This is my gift to you." She placed it in my hands. It was a passbook, an old-fashioned bank passbook, the kind no longer issued. First National Bank was stamped in flaking gold across the front. "I don't understand," I began. "This is everything I have," my mother said. Her eyes shimmered, yet her voice held steady. "Everything I've saved. I want you to have the freedom I never did, the freedom to choose your own path." I turned the passbook over. It weighed almost nothing. Behind me, murmurs stirred among the guests. "A savings book? That's all? How ancient is that thing?" I didn't care. The way my mother looked at me, fierce, tender, achingly hopeful, tightened my throat. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered, drawing her into an embrace. "Thank you." "Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless," she murmured against my ear. "Promise me, whatever anyone says, don't throw it away." I didn't grasp the warning, but I nodded. "I promise." She drew back, and for a fleeting moment, she seemed transformed, stronger, younger, like the woman she might have become had life been gentler. Then my father's voice shattered the air. "What is supposed to be that?" He was on his feet now, his chair shoved back so violently it nearly overturned. His face was flushed, alcohol, humiliation at being eclipsed by Harold's gift, and something darker I couldn't yet name. "Helen?" He spat her name like venom. "What the hell is that?" My mother didn't reply. She stood motionless, hands folded, gaze lowered. He crossed the room in 4 long strides. Before I could move, he had torn the passbook from my grasp. "A savings book?" He laughed, but it wasn't laughter. It was cruelty wearing laughter's mask. "You gave our daughter a savings book in front of the Mercers?" "Richard, please," my mother began. 30 years? His voice no longer stayed low. It swelled to fill the ballroom, ricocheting off crystal chandeliers and silk-draped walls. 30 years of marriage, and this is what you contribute? This worthless? He hurled it. The passbook struck the marble floor with a sharp slap. It skidded across the stone and came to rest beside a rose arrangement. "Garbage belongs with garbage," he roared. The silence that followed was total. 150 people froze. Forks hung suspended. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. The string quartet had fallen mute. I heard Catherine Mercer draw a quick breath, heard someone, perhaps Harold, set a glass down with deliberate care. My mother stood rigid, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, accepting the blow as though she had long been trained to absorb it. "You've embarrassed me the last time," my father declared, turning to the room as though anticipating approval. "I apologize to our guests for my wife's pathetic display. The Donovans are better than this." He straightened his Tom Ford jacket, smoothed his hair, and offered Harold Mercer a smile as though the scene had never occurred. In that suffocating quiet, my mother whispered so softly only I could hear, "I'm sorry, Morgan. I'm so sorry." She was apologizing to me. After everything he had just done, she was the one saying sorry. Something inside me broke. Daniel's hand found mine beneath the table. His fingers shook, not from fear, but from the strain of restraint. "I'm going to," he began. "Don't." My voice emerged steadier than I felt. "Don't give him what he wants." I could feel Daniel's fury radiating like heat. His jaw was locked so tightly, I feared he might fracture bone. His free hand had balled into a fist against the linen. "Morgan, he just—" "I know." I knew exactly what Daniel wanted, to stride across that room, to drive my father through the ice sculpture, to defend my mother's dignity, my dignity, before every witness to this ugliest moment of my life. But I had grown up with Richard Donovan. I knew exactly how this scene would unfold. If Daniel struck him, my father would instantly become the victim. If Daniel shouted, my father would appear measured by comparison. Any violence would hand him the perfect distraction, a chance to rewrite the story. Instead of the man who had just berated his wife over a savings book, he'd emerge as the wronged father-in-law assaulted at his daughter's wedding. I refused to grant him that victory. Across the room, Harold Mercer rose. The warmth had vanished from his face, replaced by something cold and final. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I think we should leave." "Yes," his wife replied without hesitation, "I think we should." My father's smile wavered. "Harold, please, this is just a family matter." "Mr. Donovan," Harold's voice could have chilled the champagne in the flutes, "I've seen enough to know precisely what kind of man you are." They began collecting their belongings. On the floor near the roses, my mother's gift lay forgotten. Garbage, my father had called it. He had no idea. I released Daniel's hand. "Morgan," his voice carried worry. "What are you—" "Trust me." I stood slowly. Every gaze in the room followed. The silk of my wedding dress sighed against my legs as I stepped down from the head table. My father turned toward me, his expression cycling through confusion, annoyance, the stirrings of another outburst. I walked past him. My heels tapped the marble. 1 step, 2, 3. The passbook rested where it had landed, its faded blue cover vivid against the pale stone. One corner had creased from the force. I knelt, lifted it, and brushed it off with care, tenderly, as though it were fragile porcelain. When I rose, I didn't glance at my father. I went straight to my mother, who stood rigid near the wall, tears still glistening on her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom," I said loud enough for the room to carry my words. "This is the most meaningful gift I've ever received. I'll treasure it forever." I kissed her cheek and felt her tremble. Then I turned to Daniel, already standing. "We're leaving," I told him. "Where do you think you're going?" My father's voice cracked on the question. "The reception isn't over. You're embarrassing me in front of—" I paused, turned just enough to meet his eyes from the corner of my vision. "I don't need your permission, Dad, and I don't need your approval." My voice emerged calm, steady, a tone I hadn't known I owned. "What I need is to leave, so that's what I'm doing." Daniel took my hand. Together, we walked toward the exit. Behind us, my father continued shouting about disrespect, about everything he had supposedly done for me. I heard none of it. I simply kept moving. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was hushed. Harold and Catherine had given Daniel the key months earlier, but we'd intended to save it for after the honeymoon. Instead, it became our sanctuary on our wedding night. Daniel ordered Thai food. Neither of us ate much. I sat on the window seat, still wearing my wedding dress. I hadn't found the strength to change, and watched the city lights smear through the glass. The passbook rested on the cushion beside me, its worn leather warmed by my touch. "You don't have to open it tonight," Daniel said gently. "Whatever's inside can wait." I know, yet I couldn't stop tracing its edges, running my fingers over the embossed letters, wondering what my mother had truly meant by freedom. "She stayed for me," I said suddenly. "All those years, she stayed for me." Daniel settled beside me, careful not to disturb the passbook. "You don't know that for certain." "I do." And somehow I did. The way she had looked at me today, the way she had said, "I want you to have the freedom I never had." It wasn't only about money. It was about choices, about being confined so long you forget a world exists beyond the bars. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet." But that wasn't completely honest. One thing I knew without doubt. My mother told me to go to the bank, First National, the Greenwich branch. She said to ask for a Mr. Patterson. Daniel was silent for a beat. "Tomorrow." I nodded. "Tomorrow." Through the window, the Manhattan Bridge shimmered in the distance. Some way out there, my father was likely still fuming. I no longer cared. I was finished allowing him to dictate my life. My phone began vibrating at 6 a.m. 17 missed calls, all from the same number. The voicemails swung from rage to pleading, looping like a damaged track. First message: "You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of Harold Mercer." Third: "I'm cutting you out of the will. You'll get nothing." Seventh: "Morgan, sweetie, Dad's sorry. Too much champagne. Let's talk." 12th: "You ungrateful little..." I stopped listening. Daniel watched me block the number, his coffee cooling untouched in his hands. He didn't try to dissuade me. "My mother texted," I said, opening the message. Her words were sparse, deliberate, as though each had been weighed. "My dearest Morgan, I'm so sorry for what happened. Your father doesn't know what he threw away. Go to First National, Greenwich branch. Ask for a Mr. Patterson. Show him the passbook. He'll explain everything. I love you more than you will ever know, Mom." I read it 3 times. "What do you think it means?" Daniel asked. "I don't know." I glanced at the passbook on the coffee table, its faded leather harmless in the morning light. There's an account number inside, a few old deposits. The last one was in 2003. The balance shows $847. Daniel frowned. "That's not nothing, but it's hardly life-changing." "No, but my mother said it's the most important thing she has." I lifted the passbook, feeling its near weightlessness in my palm. "And she told me to go to the bank, so that's what I'm going to do." Whatever secrets my mother had guarded, I was about to uncover them. First National Bank's Greenwich branch looked as though it had stood there since before the town itself. Tall stone columns flanked the entrance. Brass fixtures gleamed in the morning sun. The sort of quiet, old-money elegance that made my father's McMansion dreams appear exactly as frantic as they truly were. Daniel held my hand as we passed through the revolving doors. Inside, the air carried the scent of polished leather and aged paper. Tellers in starched uniforms stood behind mahogany counters. A security guard offered a courteous nod. "May I help you?" A young woman, her nameplate read Emily, smiled from the first window. "I have a Passbook account," I said, sliding the worn leather booklet across the counter. "I'd like to check the balance." Emily accepted it with a faint, puzzled expression. Passbooks were artifacts from another time, yet she entered the account number into her terminal without remark. Then her face transformed. I've replayed that instant countless times. The way her eyes widened, the way her fingers froze above the keys, the way she glanced from the screen to me, then back again. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Could you excuse me for just a moment?" She didn't wait for a reply. She pressed a button beneath the counter and vanished through a door marked "Employees Only." Daniel's grip tightened. What just happened? I don't know. My heart hammered. Something was wrong, or something was extraordinarily right. Muffled voices drifted from behind the door, followed by approaching footsteps. The door swung open, and a silver-haired man in a three-piece suit stepped out. He regarded me with an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I'm Thomas Patterson, branch manager. Would you please come with me?" He indicated a door labeled "Private Banking." "And please," he added softly, "don't leave." Let me pause here briefly. If you've ever been diminished by someone who claimed to love you, if you've ever been told your dreams held no value or your efforts meant nothing, know that you are not alone. Sometimes the most unassuming things conceal something remarkable within. What do you think was in that account? Share your guess in the comments before we go on. Now, back to the bank. The private banking area bore no resemblance to the public lobby. Persian rugs softened the floors, oil paintings hung on the walls, leather chairs likely cost more than my yearly salary. Mr. Patterson guided us to a mahogany desk and motioned for us to sit. "May I?" He extended his hand for the passbook. I handed it over. He opened it with care, almost reverence, and entered the account number into his computer. For a long moment, he simply studied the screen. "Mrs. Mercer," he said at last, "do you know what this is?" "A savings account," I answered. "My mother gave it to me at my wedding." "It's far more than that." He angled the monitor toward me. I stared, unable to comprehend. "This passbook grants access to a trust account established 25 years ago. Your mother is the settlor. You have been the designated beneficiary since birth." "The current balance," Mr. Patterson continued gently, "is $2,147,893.41. The room seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry? What?" "Approximately $2.1 million, Mrs. Mercer." He folded his hands on the desk. "Your mother has been building this fund for 25 years. Monthly deposits from her employment, prudent investments managed by our team, and an initial contribution of $200,000 from an inheritance she received in 1999. 200? I couldn't draw breath. My grandmother? Margaret Wilson. Yes, the inheritance was her separate property, legally distinct from marital assets. Your mother invested it wisely and added to it consistently." He paused. "She visited me every year on your birthday, without fail, to review the account and confirm everything remained in order." Tears came before I realized. Daniel's arm encircled me, though I barely felt it. My mother, my quiet, dismissed, seemingly powerless mother, had been constructing my freedom for 25 years, and no one had known. "I don't understand," I managed through sobs. "How is this possible? My father, he controlled everything. How did she conceal it from him?" Mr. Patterson's expression remained kind but measured. "I can only share what I know, Mrs. Mercer. Your mother established this account before I became branch manager. My predecessors set up the relationship, but she has always been meticulous." He withdrew a folder from his drawer. "The inheritance from your grandmother was classified as separate property under Connecticut law. Your mother never commingled it with marital funds. She maintained it in her maiden name, Helen Wilson, not Helen Donovan. But her job, she worked part-time at the library, then at an accounting office. My father called it worthless. He said she was wasting her time." Her deposits were modest but regular. 20 years of compound interest and conservative investments significantly increased the principal. He displayed a graph, a line rising steadily across decades. She also set aside small portions of household money, amounts too minor to notice. Grocery funds, allowances, the cash your father tossed her way as though paying a servant. She saved every bit. "There's something more," Mr. Patterson added. He slid a cream-colored envelope across the desk, sealed with wax. My mother's handwriting graced the front. "Morgan." She left this in the file to be given only when you came to claim the account. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet covered in her graceful script. "My dearest Morgan, if you're reading this, you have found your freedom. This money is yours, not your father's, not any man's. It is yours to use as you choose. I stayed because I wanted you to have a stable home, but I was never truly trapped. I was preparing. All my love, Mom." I read the letter 3 times before words returned. "She wasn't weak," I whispered. "All those years I thought she was simply enduring, accepting his cruelty, allowing him to treat her as nothing." Mr. Patterson remained silent, granting me space. Daniel held my hand as we passed through the revolving doors. Inside, the air carried the scent of polished leather and aged paper. Tellers in starched uniforms stood behind mahogany counters. A security guard offered a courteous nod. "May I help you?" A young woman, her nameplate read Emily, smiled from the first window. "I have a Passbook account," I said, sliding the worn leather booklet across the counter. "I'd like to check the balance." Emily accepted it with a faint, puzzled expression. Passbooks were artifacts from another time, yet she entered the account number into her terminal without remark. Then her face transformed. I've replayed that instant countless times. The way her eyes widened, the way her fingers froze above the keys, the way she glanced from the screen to me, then back again. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Could you excuse me for just a moment?" She didn't wait for a reply. She pressed a button beneath the counter and vanished through a door marked "Employees Only." Daniel's grip tightened. What just happened? I don't know. My heart hammered. Something was wrong, or something was extraordinarily right. Muffled voices drifted from behind the door, followed by approaching footsteps. The door swung open, and a silver-haired man in a 3-piece suit stepped out. He regarded me with an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I'm Thomas Patterson, branch manager. Would you please come with me?" He indicated a door labeled Private Banking. "And please," he added softly, "don't leave." Let me pause here briefly. If you've ever been diminished by someone who claimed to love you, if you've ever been told your dreams held no value or your efforts meant nothing, know that you are not alone. Sometimes the most unassuming things conceal something remarkable within. What do you think was in that account? Share your guess in the comments before we go on. Now, back to the bank. The private banking area bore no resemblance to the public lobby. Persian rugs softened the floors, oil paintings hung on the walls, leather chairs likely cost more than my yearly salary. Mr. Patterson guided us to a mahogany desk and motioned for us to sit. "May I?" He extended his hand for the passbook. I handed it over. He opened it with care, almost reverence, and entered the account number into his computer. For a long moment, he simply studied the screen. "Mrs. Mercer," he said at last, "do you know what this is?" "A savings account," I answered. "My mother gave it to me at my wedding." "It's far more than that." He angled the monitor toward me. I stared, unable to comprehend. "This passbook grants access to a trust account established 25 years ago. Your mother is the settlor. You have been the designated beneficiary since birth." "The current balance," Mr. Patterson continued gently, "is $2,147,893.41. The room seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry? What?" Approximately $2.1 million, Mrs. Mercer. He folded his hands on the desk. Your mother has been building this fund for 25 years. Monthly deposits from her employment, prudent investments managed by our team, and an initial contribution of $200,000 from an inheritance she received in 1999. 200? I couldn't draw breath. My grandmother? Margaret Wilson. Yes, the inheritance was her separate property, legally distinct from marital assets. Your mother invested it wisely and added to it consistently. He paused. She visited me every year on your birthday, without fail, to review the account and confirm everything remained in order. Tears came before I realized. Daniel's arm encircled me, though A what? A separation agreement? They remained in the same residence, Mr. Patterson explained, but your mother's financial and legal interests were fully protected. It was unconventional. He paused. I believe she stayed for you, Mrs. Mercer, until you were grown, until you were safe. 20 years. 20 years of sharing a house with a man who belittled her, dismissed her, reduced her to nothing. And all that time she had maintained an escape route, a quiet plan, but she had chosen to remain because of me. I need to call her, I said, fumbling for my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed. She answered on the first ring. Morgan, did you go to the bank? Mom. Tears came again, unstoppable. Mom, why didn't you tell me? All those years, why didn't you ever tell me? Her voice was thick with emotion, too. Because you were a child, and children shouldn't have to shoulder their parents' secrets. You needed to believe in the family. Even if the family was fractured, you needed stability. You sacrificed everything. No, sweetheart, I sacrificed nothing. I invested. She gave a small, watery laugh. I invested in you, and now it's time for both of us to be free. That word again, freedom. For the first time, I truly understood what she meant. What do you want to do now, Mom? The question lingered between us, suspended between two women who had spent their lives eclipsed by Richard Donovan's shadow. I want to leave. The words escaped like a long-held breath, something she'd carried for decades. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers are prepared. They've been ready for years. Years. She had waited, planned, bided her time until I was safely grown, safely married, safely beyond his grasp. I have an apartment, small, but it's mine, near the library in New Haven. I've been paying rent on it for 2 years, just waiting. 2 years? I told you, Morgan, I was preparing. There was a smile in her voice now, not bitter, not sorrowful, but something closer to quiet triumph. Your father never examined the household accounts closely. He considered money beneath him. He simply handed me cash and expected me to manage. So I did, in ways he never imagined. What about you? She asked. What do you want to do with the money? I looked at Daniel, who watched me with steady, silent support, at Mr. Patterson, who pretended to busy himself with papers, at the letter in my hands, 25 years of love distilled onto a single page. I don't want to use it for revenge, I said slowly. I don't want to flaunt it or humiliate him. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. I just want to live my life without him in it, without his approval, without his money, without his voice in my head telling me I'm not enough. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." 1 week after the wedding, my mother began packing. I wasn't there when my father discovered her, but she recounted it later in that calm, matter-of-fact tone she had honed over 30 years of marriage. He came home early and found her in the bedroom, a Samsonite suitcase open on the bed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't pause in her folding. "I'm leaving, Richard. I filed for divorce. You'll be served papers by the end of the week." He laughed, that cruel, belittling laugh I'd known my entire life. "You'll come crawling back. You don't have anything. You've never had anything." "We've been legally separated for 20 years, she replied evenly. "I have my own assets, my own lawyer, my own future." "That's impossible. I would have known." "You didn't ask. You never asked about anything that didn't directly serve you. So no, Richard, you didn't know." His face darkened to purple. She told me she had never seen him so furious, and for the first time in 30 years, she felt no fear. "You'll come crawling back," he snarled. "You don't have a penny on your name. You'll be homeless in a month." My mother lifted her suitcase and walked to the bedroom door. "Goodbye, Richard. I hope you find whatever you've been chasing in other people's admiration, because you certainly won't find it in your family anymore." She left. He remained in that empty bedroom, surrounded by the costly furniture he'd purchased to impress strangers, perhaps realizing at last that he was utterly alone, not because he'd been abandoned, but because he had driven everyone away. My phone rang at 9 p.m. that night. I had unblocked my father's number, not to speak with him, but to know the moment he finally grasps what he had lost. "Morgan, what did you do? What did you tell your mother?" "Nothing, Dad." I kept my tone even. "Mom made her own choice. She says she has money. That's impossible. She's never had—" "You must have given her something. You and that Mercer family. You must have." "This isn't about the Mercers. It isn't about me." I drew a breath. "Mom has been preparing for this for 20 years. You simply never noticed because you never truly looked at her." Silence stretched across the line. "She can't do this to me," he said at last. "I need you to talk with her. Tell her I'll change. Tell her I'll—" "Dad," I cut him off. "You had 30 years to change, 30 years to treat her like a person instead of a servant. You chose not to." "Morgan, I'm your father." "Yes, and I'll always be grateful for the roof over my head and the food on the table when I was growing up." I paused. "But I don't owe you my mother's life. I don't owe you my silence, and I certainly don't owe you forgiveness you've never sought. If you don't fix this, you'll get nothing, not a cent. I'll cut you out of everything." I almost laughed. "Dad," I said, "I don't need anything from you. Not anymore." I ended the call. Then I blocked his number again. My hands shook, but my heart held steady. I had drawn a boundary, and the world hadn't collapsed. 2 weeks after the wedding, Harold and Catherine came for dinner. It was meant to be a simple evening, wine, pasta, a chance to connect without the wedding's shadow looming over us. Daniel prepared his grandmother's lasagna. I set the table with the fine dishes we'd received as gifts. We had just sat down when the doorbell rang. I knew before I opened the door. Call it instinct, call it 30 years of navigating unpredictability. I simply knew. My father stood on the stoop, clutching flowers and a bottle of wine. His smile was fixed, brittle. "Morgan," he began, "I was in the neighborhood and thought—" "You're not invited, Dad." Behind me, Daniel's chair scraped back. Harold's voice came low and taut. "Just 5 minutes." My father's smile flickered. "I want to apologize for the wedding, for everything. Can't a father make amends?" "This isn't the time." "Please," his voice cracked. "I need to talk to Harold, just for a moment. There's been a misunderstanding." And there it was, the true motive. Even in this supposed apology, his real priority was salvaging his connection to Harold Mercer, to the business prospect Harold embodied. "Mr. Donovan?" Harold stepped forward, his tone cold as midwinter. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." "Harold, please. The wedding was a misunderstanding. I'd had too much to drink." "I watched you throw your wife's gift to the floor and call it garbage," Harold said evenly. "I watched you humiliate your family in front of 150 people. That wasn't alcohol, Mr. Donovan. That was character. My father's expression shifted from pleading to rage in an instant. You don't understand. You don't know what I've had to endure. That woman has been useless for 30 years. Dad, Daniel moved forward, placing himself between my father and the rest of us. You need to leave. Now. The flowers slipped from my father's hand and hit the ground. He stood there, breathing heavily, staring at us, all aligned against him. He had no cards left to play. You don't understand what I did for this family. His voice rose to that familiar childhood pitch, high, sharp, menacing, the one that once made my mother flinch, the one that once sent me hiding in my room. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I built everything. He jabbed a finger toward me. The house, the company, your entire life. And you repay me by turning my wife against me, by embarrassing me in front of, he gestured wildly at Harold, people who matter. Harold's face remained impassive. People who matter? Yes, important people. I spent $80,000 on that wedding specifically to... He faltered. I saw the realization settle in Harold's eyes, the pieces locking into place. Specifically to what, Mr. Donovan? Harold's voice was silk wrapped around steel. To impress me? To engineer a business relationship? My father's mouth worked soundlessly. Open, closed, open again. You spent $80,000 of borrowed money, Harold continued quietly, to stage a performance, not for your daughter, for me, for what you believed I could do for your company. That's not... I never... And your wife, who evidently has been saving quietly for 25 years, gave your daughter the most meaningful gift of the evening. You threw it on the floor. Harold shook his head. Because it didn't align with your script. Catherine rested her husband's arm gently. I think we've seen enough, dear. Yes. Harold met my father's gaze one final time. Mr. Donovan, I don't do business with men who treat their families as props. Please don't contact me again. The door closed in my father's face. Through the wood, I heard him standing there, breathing raggedly, absorbing the collapse of everything he'd tried to construct. Then, slowly, footsteps retreating down the path. He was gone. Can I be honest with you for a moment? Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't revenge at all. It isn't shouting or exposing. It's simply stepping aside and allowing someone to reveal their true self. My father had every chance to apologize sincerely, to change. Instead, he confirmed to Harold Mercer precisely who he had always been. Before I close this story, I want to ask, have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to protect yourself? Share in the comments if you feel like it. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The fallout arrived quietly, but cut deeply. My father never secured that meeting with Harold Mercer. No partnership, no investment, no entry into the larger world of real development he so desperately coveted. But that wasn't the worst of it. The story circulated, not with fanfare, no headlines, no viral posts, just the quiet whispers that travel swiftly through small Connecticut business circles. Did you hear what happened at the Donovan wedding? He threw his wife's gift on the floor. The Mercers left before the cake was served. Within months, 2 deals my father had been chasing quietly dissolved. No public announcements, just politely declined meetings, unreturned calls, lunch invitations that never materialized. His company didn't implode. He wasn't ruined. But the doors he'd spent decades trying to pry open were now sealed, quietly, firmly, permanently. I took no real pleasure. All right, perhaps a small, private satisfaction, but mostly I felt weary. Weary of decades spent performing, of lies and manipulation, of the relentless strain to earn approval from someone incapable of offering it. My father called sporadically in the early months. I never picked up. He sent letters, long, rambling missives that veered between apology and blame. I read the first, discarded the rest. "Don't you think you should talk to him?" a colleague asked once. He is still your father. I considered it. I said, he is, and I don't hate him, but I don't need him in my life to love him from afar. Some relationships thrive best with distance. She didn't understand. That was fine. Most people don't until they've lived it, until they've had to erect walls simply to breathe. My mother, though, she bloomed. There's no better word. In the months after moving into her New Haven apartment, I watched her become someone I'd never truly known. She cut her hair short, something my father had forbidden for 30 years. She painted her living room yellow, her favorite color, the one he'd dismissed as tacky. She volunteered at the library where she once worked, not for income now, but for pure delight. I forgot what it felt like to make a decision and not have to justify it, she told me over lunch one day, to simply be. The divorce finalized without drama. My father couldn't contest a thing. The separation agreement had been airtight for 2 decades. He kept the house and the business. She claimed her freedom. She confided that she'd begun journaling at first, then something more deliberate. 30 years of memories, observations, quiet strategies for survival. I'm thinking of turning it into a book, she said almost shyly. A memoir, perhaps, for other women who've been in situations like mine. Mom, I reached across the cafe table and took her hand. That's incredible. I don't know if anyone would read it. I would, and I think many others would too. I squeezed her fingers. You have a story worth hearing. She smiled, a genuine smile, not the carefully applied one I'd grown up watching. You know what I realized, she said? All those years I believed I was weak for staying, for not fighting back. But I wasn't staying out of weakness. I was staying because I was building something, a future for you. And now, she gestured around her small, sunlit apartment, now I get to build something for myself. It was the bravest thing I'd ever heard. People asked what I planned to do with the money. $2 million. Life-altering money. Quit your job money. Buy a mansion and never work again money. I kept teaching. I know it sounds absurd, but here's the truth. I didn't become a teacher because I lacked other options. I chose it because I love it. Because every day I witness 8-year-olds discover they're capable of far more than they imagined. How could money ever replace that? But I did use it thoughtfully, purposefully. With a financial advisor's guidance, I established the Margaret Wilson Education Fund, named for my grandmother, whose inheritance had set everything in motion. Each year, it supports 5 students from low-income families through college. Why not your name? Daniel asked when I showed him the paperwork. Because it's not about me, I said, signing the final document. It's about carrying forward what my mother began, using silence, patience, and small, consistent actions to change lives. We bought a house in Connecticut, not in Greenwich, not in my father's domain, but in a quiet neighborhood with strong schools and neighbors who waved hello. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a kitchen spacious enough for Sunday dinners. And I introduced a new unit to my 3rd graders, financial literacy. How to save, how to plan, how tiny actions repeated over time can grow into something immense. They were too young to grasp it fully, but one day they would. You're really not going to quit? My friend Sarah asked, incredulous. Why would I quit? Because you could do anything. Travel the world, launch a business, buy a yacht. I laughed. What would I do with a yacht? She didn't understand. That was fine. The best things in life aren't measured in square footage or horsepower. My mother taught me that. My father and I haven't spoken in 18 months. He still calls occasionally, not often, but enough to remind me he hasn't forgotten I exist. Birthdays, holidays, the odd Tuesday when he's likely had too much scotch and begun reflecting on legacy. I don't answer. I don't block him either. It's a strange space to occupy, loving someone you can't be near, understanding them while rejecting their behavior, grieving a relationship that never gave you what you needed. Will you ever forgive him? Daniel asked once. I had to pause. Forgiveness is a process, I said finally, not a single moment. I'm working on releasing the anger, the hurt, the years of feeling inadequate. Another pause. But forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door for more pain. Those are separate things. So you won't see him. Maybe someday, for a funeral, a hospital visit, something that demands family presence regardless of history. I shrugged. But Thanksgiving dinners, birthday parties, introducing him to his grandchildren, I rested a hand on my stomach. Too early to show, but we'd just learned. Not until he proves real, lasting change. Not a week or a month. Change that endures. Some thought I was too harsh. Others believed I wasn't harsh enough. Here's what I've learned. You can't please everyone. You can only make choices you can live with. And I could live with distance. I could live with boundaries. I could live with loving my father from afar, while shielding myself and my family from his turmoil. It wasn't flawless, but it was honest. And sometimes honest is enough. 3 years later, I sit in my kitchen watching my daughter eat scrambled eggs. Her name is Margaret, Maggie for short. She has Daniel's eyes, my mother's determined chin, and a laugh that brightens every room she enters. My mother is here too, guiding Maggie through the intricate art of fork to egg. She's 60 now, silver-haired and calm in a way I never witnessed growing up. She published her memoir last year. It didn't top bestseller lists, but she's received dozens of letters from women who saw their own lives reflected in her pages. Worth it, she told me, holding one of those letters. Even if it helped only one person, it was worth it. Daniel is brewing coffee, humming softly. He's expanded his architecture practice to include pro bono designs for community centers. Giving back, he says, paying forward the fortune we've received. The Margaret Wilson Education Fund has now supported 43 students through college. Last year, one sent a thank you note that brought tears. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I didn't even know you, and you changed my life. I framed it. It hangs in my classroom. Through the window, the Connecticut afternoon glows, leaves turning gold, sunlight filtering through branches. Days like this once filled me with dread. Perfect weather meant entertaining, entertaining meant exhaustion. Now perfect weather simply means perfect weather. Mama, Maggie announces, raising her fork triumphantly. I did it. You did, baby. I'm so proud of you. My mother meets my gaze across the table. We're both smiling. I keep the Passbook framed now, hanging in our living room near the window where afternoon light warms the faded blue leather. Visitors sometimes ask about it. Is that a savings book? I give them the short version. It was my mother's gift, the most valuable thing she ever gave me. They always ask how much was in it. That's not the point I want them to hear. $2 million matters, yes, but what matters more is what it stood for. 25 years of patience, 25 years of small, unseen actions building to something vast, 25 years of love shown not in grand declarations, but in quiet preparation. My mother didn't save me with a dramatic last-minute rescue. She saved me by planning year after year so that when I finally needed freedom, it was already there waiting. That's the lesson I carry now. The people who truly love you don't always love loudly. Sometimes they love in silence, in persistence, in showing up faithfully even when no one notices. And the people who try to diminish you, their power lasts as long as you accept it. The moment you step away, the moment you stop performing for their approval, you see they were never as formidable as they seemed. They were only loud. My father called the Passbook garbage. He threw it to the floor in front of everyone who mattered to him. He was wrong. The garbage wasn't the Passbook. The garbage was the notion that love can be measured in performances, in impressions, in how much admiration you can command. Real love resembles my mother's savings book. Worn, faded, easy to dismiss, and worth more than everything my father ever tried to purchase. If you're in a situation where someone makes you feel small, please know this. You're not small. You're simply surrounded by people who haven't yet learned to see you. One day, you'll find those who do, and everything will change. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. If this touched you, if you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect yourself, I'd love to hear your story. Share in the comments below. I read every one. And if you'd like more stories like this, tales of quiet strength, unexpected justice, and the power of patience, please subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. More stories are linked in the description below. Until next time, take care of yourself. You're worth it.